Clarence Thomas destroyed the liberal lawyer in the Colorado election case yesterday. It goes up to the Supreme Court. This is the state of Colorado insisting that we, the states, have the right to kick a presidential candidate off the ballot because of the 14th Amendment or something. Justice Thomas knocks it down.
It would seem that particularly after Reconstruction and after the Compromise of 1877 and during the period of Redeemers, that you would have that kind of conflict. There were a plethora of Confederates still around. There were any number of people who would continue to either run for state offices or national offices. So it seemed that would suggest that there would at least be a few examples of national candidates being disqualified, if your reading is correct.
Well, there were certainly national candidates who were disqualified by Congress refusing to seat them.
I understand that, but that's not this case.
Pause right there. I love that. You know, right from this answer that Colorado's got nothing, that these liberals who want to kick Trump off, they've got nothing. You say, well, Justice, I don't have any of the sort of examples that you are asking me for, but here's a totally irrelevant example. And Thomas, having none of it, he goes, yeah, sure, I don't care about what you ordered at McDonald's last week, buddy. You don't need to recite the poetry of Robert Frost to me. I'm asking for a very specific answer that pertains to the very specific legal argument you guys are making, namely that the states have the right, based on the 14th Amendment, to boot political candidates they don't like off the ballot. So can you give me any example? We know that this is a Reconstruction era provision of the 14th Amendment to stop the Confederates from taking over the country. So that would be the time when this kind of provision would be most exercised. Can you give me even one single example of it ever being exercised in the way you claim 150 years later that you, Colorado, have a right to do? And the lawyer says, humana.
Did states disqualify them? That's what we're talking about here. I understand Congress would not seat them.
Other than the example I gave, no.
States were sending people. The concern was that the former Confederate states would continue being bad actors. And the effort was to prevent them from doing this. And you're saying that, well, this also authorized states to disqualify candidates. So what I'm asking you for, if you are right, what are the examples?
Well, Your Honor, the examples are states excluded many candidates for state office, individuals holding state offices.
Put a pause here. Yeah, man, I know. The states do state things, sure. And the federal government can, though they really didn't, do federal government things. The Congress took some actions, but then they stopped taking those actions. And, oh, yeah, sure, okay. But the case that you're bringing, buddy, is arguing that the states can disqualify a presidential candidate based on the 14th Amendment. So you're doing a big soft shoe around this issue. Can you give me one example? No.
A number of published cases of states considering that.
I understand the states controlling state elections and state positions. What we are talking about here are national candidates, but they did not think.
It's like Justice Thomas is explaining this to a 10-year-old. He's saying, he's even showing a great deal of sympathy here and compassion for this lawyer who is being obtuse. You know, he probably knows that he's got nothing, so he's dancing around it. But if he is really just this ignorant, he's saying, no, the states and the federal government are different. And they're treated differently by the law. So the case you're trying to make, sir, is X, Y, and Z. Keep going.
I think about authorizing the South to disqualify national candidates. And that's the argument you're making. And what I would like to know is do you have any examples of this?
Many of those historians have filed briefs in our support in this case, making the point that the idea of the 14th Amendment was that both states and the federal government would ensure rights, and that if states failed to do so, the federal government certainly would also step in. So I don't think the history tells us.
Sort of look at Justice Thomas's question sort of from the 30,000-foot level. I mean, the whole point of the 14th Amendment was to restrict state power, right? States shall not abridge privileges of immunity. They won't deprive people of property without due process. They won't deny equal protection. And on the other hand, it augmented federal power under Section 5. Congress has the power to enforce it. So wouldn't that be the last place that you'd look for authorization for the states, including Confederate states, to enforce, implicitly authorized, to enforce the presidential election process? That seems to be a position that is at war with the whole thrust of the 14th Amendment and very ahistorical.
Oh, devastating, because the person here at the end there is Chief Justice John Roberts, who's kind of a squish, and he sides with the libs a lot. And even he's coming in and he's saying, yo, Colorado, you got nothing, man. Actually, the provisions you're citing, they would be the last place you'd go to make the sort of argument that you're making. So this, happily, this could be a unanimous Supreme Court decision for all we know, because Colorado doesn't have a leg to stand on. Could be 8-1. You know, maybe either Ketanji Jackson or Sotomayor side with Colorado. Maybe they're both quite partisan. Maybe it's 7-2, but I think it's pretty clear Trump is going to remain the nominee. And I think it's clear that Biden, so long as he can breathe, is going to remain the nominee. And it's clear that Vladimir Putin is going to remain the president of the Russian Federation. And who do you want going up against that guy?
Hi, Michael. It's the Shuckmeister. I had a question about your brilliant showing on the Whatever podcast. When you go onto these types of shows, are you ever concerned about bringing yourself or your audience into the near occasion of sin? I love that you treat all the women on the panel with dignity and don't dunk on them for social points. But the women you talk to are all dressed pretty provocatively, speak about topics that are intended to tempt certain desires, and there's a bunch of links to very degenerate content in the video description. I appreciate that you're taking the same approach as our Lord, who dined with sinners and prostitutes, but said sinners and prostitutes weren't actively advertising their quote-unquote content to a wider audience, particularly people in the creme de la creme who I hope wouldn't fall into those temptations. I'm not trying to be the purity police, but it's just something I'm genuinely curious about, and I wonder if there's a more prudent way to engage with these people. Let me know what you think. Thanks.
It's a fear, and I've thought of it, but I ultimately don't think it's too much of a concern. I think it's still worth going on whatever, maybe some other shows. My chief goal when I go on a show like the Whatever podcast is to convince these women to stop doing what they're doing. That's my chief immediate goal, more than any show I'm putting on for the audience. If I were just putting on a show for the audience, I would call the women, big dumb idiots, and as perhaps some of the other guests do on the show, and probably then the clips would go more viral. My chief objective is to convince these women to stop selling their bodies for sex. Then, when one stops going in the wrong direction, one can then turn around, go in the right direction. That's my next goal. And then the general goal of going on a public forum is to convince the other people who are at home that if they're in the woman's position, they should stop doing that. Or if they're in the position of the consumer, that they're like weird, creepy cucks for looking at pornography and they should cut it out because it's degrading to them and is harmful to the women. So to your point, does just even appearing on the show, does that tempt people to subscribe to the girls' OnlyFans websites or whatever? I don't think in particular, because much of our conversation chinks away at the facade that they present on their pornography websites. So, like, to give an example, I was talking to some of these girls and they open up and they say, hey, subscribe to my OnlyFans. We got really hot content, or, jiggle around or whatever. But very quickly then the girls admit, oh, actually, I don't have really good relationships with men. And, oh, actually, I have a stalker now and it's really dark and I'm not allowed to use my real name. And sometimes I get kind of depressed about it, and I really miss this person that I was in love with, and I can't get that back. And my life isn't that good, and it's really kind of bad and degraded. And it would seem to me that exposing even porn customers or potential porn customers to the reality of that is much more likely to discourage them from looking at the content than to entice them to look at it. But I agree with you. it's a concern and therefore requires a prudential judgment. Man, what a great clip that was, huh? It was good. We all agree on that. So ring that bell, subscribe to the Michael Knowles YouTube channel, and we'll see you next time.